Let's talk through, as you see the stalemate companies are in now,
Yeah.
of the either or, we get them back in, or we got to settle with this hybrid, and none of it's going well.
Yeah.
What's the challenge they have if we settle into this current state where nobody's really happy, and it's this tension between employee freedom, wondering when that's going to get pulled on, the rug's going to get pulled, and the company feeling like, oh, we need accountability, need to use our real estate, and we're not sure we're getting innovation or creativity. And it's more of these generalized concerns and fears. How would you propose what the alternative might be?
If you solve these two things, you've won 80% of the battle. So what are the two things? What are the two big shifts? The first is work has traditionally been set up to optimize for the speed of knowledge transfer. As in, how fast can person A tap person B on the shoulder and transfer information from one brain to the next? So if you have everyone in an office, this works incredibly well. So the friction is, well, if you're all remote and every interaction has to be scheduled, then it feels slower because you're still set up to optimize for the speed of knowledge transfer. The way to solve this is to re-architect the system to optimize for the speed of knowledge retrieval. This would enable person A and person B to retrieve the information from a system independent of each other being online at the same time. Why is this difficult? It's because you have to codify everything which was implicit. And so organizations look at this mountain in front of them and think, how are we ever going to find time to document our culture, document our values, document our team norms? All of this, which once was kind of hanging around in the atmosphere, well, now to get this scaled across people, across time zones, someone has to be responsible for auditing it, codifying it, sharing it, and putting it into a system. So there's one other thought on AI that I want to mention. I think generative AI has arrived on the scene at the perfect time because it used to be very difficult for me to be able to persuade an organization to invest in essentially writing the operating manual or the operating system for their company. But now I can see a future where, let's say that you're getting a cross-functional team together for the first time. You could ask a generative AI system, here's what I want to do. How would you recommend that I do it? Who would you pull in? And what systems should we set up to make this successful? The only way that AI is going to give you a good answer is as if it has a good data set. You have to create the data set. So now people are like, okay, I'll write things down because I can get AI to parse it instead of having to train every person to be this genius searcher. So I think that is going to be massively empowering. The second one is communication. Communication is a real bugaboo for people trying to run remote teams if they've only ran co-located teams. Here's the analogy I would use. Every organization is at its molecular core an operating system. Think of it like Mac OS. But when they built their Mac OS, they took a bunch of shortcuts on the communication layer. And in some cases, they didn't write code for the communication at all. They just said, we'll throw everybody in a building and they'll figure it out. That was the patchwork code. In the absence of the office, these gaping holes in the operating code are very painful. And in the absence of having someone in the organization responsible for writing that code and connecting the dots, these gaps become more painful as you hire new people in that aren't drafting on the rapport that they had built in the office. And so the longer we go, the more new hires come in after that rapport is built, the worse it feels for organizations, hence the return to office. They're like, we got to get back to the thing that I remember that worked instead of building a new system that makes it better. Now, the sublayer of this is where I think we could have a real impact, which is I see the allocation of social capital changing rapidly. In the old way of work, a lot of people's identity and where they built up social capital was at the workplace. So their primary friends were friends from work. Their secondary friends were their own family, local community, people at church. I'm starting to see that invert, where the primary place that social capital is built is local community, friends, family, church, so on and so forth. And then for some people, they don't get any of their social capital from work and they're fine with that. Or if they do get social capital from work, it looks and feels very differently. The friction is old school leaders see this as a threat to their very identity, the very culture of the company. Instead of realizing that like this, maybe that was never super healthy for people to get a lot of their social capital from work. And instead of burying your head in the sand or pretending it doesn't exist, what would it look like if your organization empowered people to build social capital from outside of the workplace? What if you educated them? I know this sounds absurd, but what if we taught people how to make friends outside of work? I mean, it's like say the quiet thing out loud. I think in the future of work, you can focus more on work if you enable, empower, and to give people permission to build that social capital outside of work. And then when you layer that with ESG, it's like people are struggling. Like, how do we bolster our ESG metrics? And I'm thinking, teach people how to make friends outside of work. Teach them to plug into their local Habitat for Humanity. Teach them to go to their local orphan center and volunteer time with your company's logo on the t-shirt. Like this, the infrastructure is already built. This is the easiest win ever. Well, you just have to take permission to look outside of it.
And the challenge before is that you never had time to do that.
Correct.
So you didn't plug in to those structures. So 2 questions that I can think people are wondering about. Okay. You've got asynchronous communication with tools like Slack. So why is Slack not the answer to the communication friction?
I think it can be. Slack is doing a good job of building itself out. They just introduced this tool called Canvas, which is very powerful. You could have this almost permanent canvas that could be a living, evolving structure where communication can happen. I think it can be. I think what needs to happen is you need someone on the team responsible for experience or org design to actually detail, here's how we use Slack to fill in a lot of the gaps and the friction.
Because a lot of people use it kind of as default mode.
And they use it whichever way they want. That's the problem. It's like when you have hundreds or thousands of people using one tool in slightly different ways, that's the disharmony in that gets
so much noise.
Yes.
So the second question I can imagine people asking or thinking about or confronting is that the DNA of the office, your basic DNA culture, who we are, how we work, the habits, the rituals, the unspoken words, totally different from hybrid. And so how do you avoid creating 2 cultures or, subcultures or stepchildren cultures or all of that? Your former company was totally remote. I know WordPress is totally remote. So there's got to be a different strategy or approach to building alignment, cohesive culture, a sense of connectedness. Salesforce, which is a distributed technology company, so to speak, they bought their own retreat facility because they feel there's high value in that onboarding, building community that then supports remote. How do companies kind of bounce back and forth, or how do you get that cohesive culture?
So the first thing I'd say is don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. In other words, let's use the opportunity to build a proper in-person strategy. I think a lot of companies try to go remote or hybrid, and then they don't invest anything in building a cadence for people to get together. So let's spend some time documenting and thinking out loud of why do we want to get people together? How often do we want to get people together? Is it different from team to team? But I think just saying it out loud puts you in a better place instead of solving for how do we make this work without ever getting people together. I actually don't advise that. And I think a lot of people are relieved to hear like, whew, okay, we actually can get people together. That's part 1A. 1B is redefining equality. So I have this theory that equality was never a thing, even in the office, because the CEO, even if they were in the same office, lived a very different life. I think the right metric to go after is equity in terms of access to information. If everyone in the company, whether in office, whether in a different continent, whether remote, can access the same amount of information, then at least you all have access to a shared reality.
It's interesting.
And that enables you to break down things like proximity bias. Like, you know, I can't get promoted because I don't have access to the information from the meeting after the meeting. You'll never entirely eliminate that in hybrid, but you can build a culture that honors disseminating information such that like we're all rallying for equity in terms of, hey, does everybody have everything they need from an information standpoint? So I just spoke at Fortune Brainstorm Tech this week, and I was lucky enough to have the CEO of Google X, their startup factory. His name is Astro Teller, by the way.
Cool name.
The name Astro is amazing. Okay. Right. So he asked a question, and it's not what he asked, but it got my mind on this train of thought. Basically, what he said was, what I struggle with is some days I just want 6 hours in my bedroom to do this thing. But then on days where I'm trying to incubate entirely new startup ideas, I am much faster to get to results if I have people in a room together. He was like, how do I balance that? How do I brainstorm virtually as fast as I can brainstorm in person? And I didn't give him the best answer in the moment, but as I marinated on it, where I landed, and I think this is perfect for a workshop, is what if we defined for your company, here's what brainstorming in person looks like. Here's what brainstorming virtually looks like. And here's the key. And here are the trade-offs for both. Because as awesome as brainstorming in person is, imagine if you had a distributed team, you need a minimum 1 month lead time just to get everyone together. So the trade-off of in person is like, this is going to take you minimum a month. Whereas on virtually, we can do this tomorrow. So there's a pro, there's a con, and those are the things that really aren't being said. And I think there's some value in workshopping. What are the actual pros and cons or trade-offs? And then just have them both out there. And then if you're the team lead, you're able to look at both of these and you can either make a binary decision, we're going to do it this way for this one or this way. Or maybe there's some magic where you start seeing the pros and cons for each of them and you think, I wonder if we can like get the best of both worlds. And that's where I would love 40 people in our workshop. Like, you tell me. I think if we would prompt them with something like that, they would all go deep in their own organizations. And I think some magic would start to happen because I don't see enough people. It's too divisive right now. It's like, hey, in-person brainstorming is the best. And I'm starting to think the best is subjective. Like, are we being fair about the trade-offs? I think I know what you're saying. I've been in some great in-person brainstorms. I think I know what you're saying.
Right.
But there's this thing called anchoring bias. Like, once you're anchored in that way of thinking, are you not considering other things?
Yeah, you filter out. So, correct. I mean, all this fits extremely well with the mind shift model we have for navigating the future. One of my favorite quotes is, the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. One of the things we look at are outliers and then look at what's common between them and what's different. If you were going to pick 3, 4, 5 outliers right now that you think they don't have all the answers, but they certainly have pieces. I know you might put WordPress in there, but who would you consider right now as some of the outliers?
Dropbox is one.
Okay.
Atlassian is one.
I've heard, yes.
You know what? From what I've seen, I might even throw Ford in there because Ford and Cimpress I would bundle together because they have a more difficult task. Part of their actual business is physically manufacturing things, and so they will never have perfect equality. So what they're optimizing for is equity and access to information. And so I like to surface examples that have the hard road, because then it makes it more difficult for people to be like, oh, of course GitLab can do it. They never had an office to untangle that kind of like,
Sure.
okay,
Yeah.
that's valid.
I love those.
Those come to mind as winners right off the top.
And then in terms of reference books, I would look at Stanley McChrystal's Team of Teams, how he broke silos, and he did democratize information. And the second would be David Gray's book, The Connected Company, that came out in the early 2000s. And then I would go to Christopher Locke's book in 1999 called Clue Train Manifesto, as some of these to revisit, to see what they knew and what they were dealing with. Complexity. Team of Teams was about deploying mission teams more frequently to keep up with the learning curve of Al-Qaeda. They had to do two things: break barrier. They created a place. It broke the silos between the different special forces teams, democratized information, allowed self-organizing teams for mission-based work, gave situational awareness, lots of visual situational awareness, so that they can make team decisions in real time. I think there's something to learn there.
Anything that we can pull from the way back only furthers this, because I've said often that a lot of these remote first principles are simply good business principles. And if you can take it all the way back to like first principles, it disarms the conversation of like, okay, there's a little bit of newness here, but it's actually not all that new. I can do this. I can handle this. I can absorb this. It makes it feel more attainable.
I actually wrote a book in 2004 that anticipated these things. So we've got a lot to work with, and I'll use what we've just done to develop content that we can put on the web.